Hello, and welcome to Glory Be. Interesting people and how they pray.
Each week, we chat with interesting people about their lives, their work, and how they pray. I'm Sharon Hanish.
And I'm Father Vince Fernandez, and we're joined by our producer, Mike Malcolm.
Our guest this week is Dr. Elizabeth Collier. She is a professor of business ethics at Dominican University in Chicago. She serves as the secretary of the North American chapter of the United Nations Principles of Responsibility Management Education. She is on the advisory board of the Archdiocese of Chicago's Office of Human Dignity and Solidarity for Immigration Ministry. She holds a Master of Theological Studies from Weston Jesuit School of Theology and a Ph.D. in Theological Ethics from Loyola University, Chicago. She is also married and has 3 teenage children. Welcome, Liz. So excited you're here.
I know. I'm so excited to be here.
For those who don't know, Liz and I went to grad school together, and she is a good friend. So how has your quarantine been going? I know you're balancing raising 3 teenage children, writing, lecturing, and teaching, and all doing all of this remotely.
Right. All remotely and all with, 3 teenagers home 24 hours a day for 6 months now. So things are going pretty well. We have been lucky in Chicago while it was sort of hot this summer, we have had really great weather. So we're taking advantage of being outside as much as possible. And the kids are being troopers, even though definitely it's been a challenge, for teens being with their parents 24 hours a day for 6 months, with no interruption isn't ideal. But we're doing pretty well.
Good. So, we will talk with you first about how interesting you are. And one of the things that I'm interested in knowing more about is that you're an advisor to the Archdiocese on immigration ministry. So also because we're friends, I know that you're passionate about immigration, that you volunteered with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps right out of college, I think. So, why is this your passion? How did that come about?
So yes, my all the work that I've done in immigration related ministries and law firms really stems back to my time in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. So I went to Creighton University, and Creighton was really my first experience with doing service work, with learning about theology. I grew up in sort of rural central Illinois, and while we went to Mass every Sunday and prayed at meals and, observed Lent and other things, where we lived, there wasn't a significant Catholic population. And so my real sort of faith my most formative experiences, I think, came at Creighton. So I was really introduced to, service work and integrating theological reflection at Creighton. And then when I graduated, I had decided to do the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and in JVC, you commit to a year of living in community, a year of deepening your spirituality, a year of doing social justice, and of living a very, very simple lifestyle. So I ended up being accepted into JVC South and moved to Houston. And of the jobs that were available, I ended up getting a job at a pro bono legal aid office that was situated in Catholic Charities. And they worked on behalf of primarily Central Americans who were fleeing all of the violence in El Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua. And so I didn't know anything about what was going on in Central America in the 80s. I did know that the Jesuits had a significant presence down there because when I was at Creighton, that's when the Jesuits were martyred at the University of Central America in San Salvador. So my year at JVC was just really an awakening of this whole world that I didn't really know about, surrounded by cornfields and soybean fields in central Illinois. So I learned a lot about, politics and economics and geography. And then it was also a time of significant struggle for me because I didn't know anything about how does a person of faith respond to the incredible tragedies that these people were fleeing in their home countries? And I mean, I had the opportunity to work with people who had worked with Oscar Romero and had fled to the United States because of the persecution that they were experiencing. So I just had never had any way of understanding how this could be situated by our faith. And then one of the retreats that we had in JVC, the social justice retreat, I was introduced to Catholic social teaching by Fred Kammer, who's a Jesuit, a civil rights activist, a lawyer. And he was president of Catholic Charities USA at one point. So he just gave this amazing introduction to Catholic social teaching and, just the common good and all sorts of things that I had never learned about growing up in, CCD or parish life. And so it was clear sort of from that time on that really what I was called to do in addition to my work in higher education. So just along the way, I've just continuously everywhere I've moved, I've gotten involved in immigration-related issues. I've worked in immigration law firms to really learn how to, how the system in the U.S. works. And then my dissertation was basically a critique of legislative proposals using Catholic social teaching as a lens to evaluate different legislative proposals that were proposed while I was in PhD work.
Wow. Okay, so all of that, do you use that in your service with the Archdiocese?
So basically, this particular office is an amazing office. So the main ministry that they talk about is Pastoral Migratoria, and basically it's an accompaniment, and it's a twofold accompaniment. So the office was started by a Peruvian woman with support from initially from the Archdiocese and Cardinal George. And then Cardinal Supich has been a significant supporter, both in terms of all of our fundraising efforts, but also just sort of moral support, because Chicago is such a center of immigration. And so basically, I've been on this advisory board for many, many years. And, we meet, I help out with sort of the theological end of, things that they're going to publish or conferences that they have. I helped with a symposium this summer on Catholic higher education and the call for Catholic higher ed to educate undocumented students. So we had Dominican University, DePaul University, and Loyola University Medical School. Loyola Medical School was the first medical school to admit undocumented students into their med school program. So Dominican University, where I work, also the president, she and I were on the advisory board together because Dominican has been at the forefront of early on calling for Catholic higher education institutions to understand that they have a responsibility to support undocumented students because of the lack of resources that they have access to. So I think my work is sort of broad ranging. I speak throughout the Archdiocese on immigration related issues in Theology on Tap or parish missions. So I'm kind of, one of the theological resources that they can use when they're developing or need, an expert in the church's teaching specifically on immigration, which a lot of people don't know that there are, pastoral letters and very well thought out and well developed, theological pieces on immigration.
That's awesome. That's all. I mean, it's pretty incredible stuff. And you're kind of right in terms of, the everyday Catholic doesn't really understand there's a lot of theology behind this, right?
Right.
And you kind of mentioned yourself, like when you joined, JVC, you were kind of thrown into the deep end and you kind of realized our faith really integrates into all these issues, right?
Right.
What's one thing you would want to say, so to the normal Catholic in terms of kind of how the Catholic Church understands immigration, what's one thing that maybe you'd want to kind of make clear or help kind of, the everyday Catholic understand? Because like my family, we're a family of immigrants, right? I came here, I was naturalized in 8th grade, and it was it was tough. It was an uphill climb, seeing my parents, and that was 60% of our life is just like trying to become American citizens.
Right.
But then, so what would you say, to like the everyday Catholic who probably doesn't know anything about, the church's teaching on immigration? What's kind of a key idea that we should take away?
Okay, so I don't know that I can just say one.
Okay.
But so I would say, I have three. I'll see what I can stick with. One of the most important elements of the teaching on immigration is there's a document called Strangers No Longer that the U.S. bishops wrote with the Mexican bishops. And what's really interesting is that is the only area of official church teaching that integrates vignettes of people's lives. And so it'll talk about people losing family members when they cross the Rio Grande. So I think that's a really important theological development. One of my favorite parts of the immigration teaching is there's a threefold process that we're supposed to understand, that we're to go through when we're dealing with immigration-related issues. And it's communion, conversion, and solidarity. And so the first step is that we have to go meet immigrants. We have to go meet people who are coming here from elsewhere and create a relationship with them, because in that relationship, we will have a conversion experience where we more fully turn toward God, to the community. And then as a result of that conversion experience, then we will be more in solidarity with the immigrant. And I think that can go for almost any area of teaching. But the only place I've seen that explicitly taught in that manner is in the immigration teaching itself. And then the last super quick thing is, if you read the immigration teaching, there are 5 rights that they talk about. And so I think that people don't have an understanding that the church is not. So the church talks about human dignity preceding the state. And so while we've created ways of organizing our civic lives together, the church teaches that, a border is something that we've created as a way of managing and organizing our lives. But the human dignity of someone fleeing something, that is more important than a focus on the border. And because the United States is a country that has a high standard of living, that there really is a very serious moral duty on our part to welcome the stranger as brothers and sisters. So I'd say those are kind of my 3 quick, most important. And it's a beautiful teaching. If you read the documents, a lot of church documents that, I have to read for work can be relatively dry, but I think the immigration teaching really has an incredible beauty to it.
Wow. That was great. I hadn't heard. We're good friends. We don't talk about these important issues.
You're good friends, talking about important issues.
Well, we talk about children and managing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Those are important too. But that deep, boy, I hadn't thought about that. Gosh.
Yeah. Well, I really like what you said about in terms of kind of a boundary versus like a human person, right? Because there is like, if we understand like law, right? We have like eternal law, like God's law. We also have like human law. And like human law is always going to be subservient to God's law, right? And so like, the greatest good is the human dignity. And even though like, yes, borders are there for a reason, whatever, private property, things like that. When it comes to like a conflict of goods, you're going to side with the human person every time, right? Like it's not going to, it's like what is more important, protecting this line or like someone who's starving, right? You go for the person who's starving every time. But people, I think we can forget that, right? And that's why, you talk about like meeting these immigrants and learning their story and having that conversion experience and recognize like, oh, these are, fellow human beings too. Because another thing is like immigrants are just like immigrant. Like, it's kind of how people like see homeless people sometimes. Like they're, can't see them as people. They're just like this thing, right?
Exactly.
But the big thing is to see these others as people. So that's huge. I think that's awesome.
That is awesome. Okay, real quick question, because I know we're going to be moving on to prayer in a minute, but can you talk a little bit about your work with the United Nations?
Yes. So the other half of my professional existence, in addition to immigration, is teaching business ethics in our undergrad and our MBA program at Dominican. And it's really unusual for a business school, a Catholic business school, even to hire a theologian, which I think is really interesting. And hopefully that'll change as time goes on. But basically, this relates to the UN initiative because in the year, I think around the year 2000, the United Nations started an initiative called the UN Global Compact. And basically, it was an attempt to engage corporations in upholding, sort of committing to and upholding a set of 10 principles in light of all of the issues that we're facing, as a globe, a planet with climate change, migration flows that are only going to increase, environmental degradation, and all sorts of other issues. So they worked to get thousands of corporations on board to really start moving some of their business practices into more sustainable areas. And really, Catholic social teaching is going to be supportive of pretty much everything that's part of the Global Compact. So, they talk about labor issues and labor unions and, human trafficking and, there's labor, economics, climate, and so forth. So anyway, this initiative took off. And then they realized that, schools of management are feeding, future employees into all of these corporations. So they started a management initiative in 2007. And the focus of the Global Compact and Prime right now are the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 goals from 2015 to 2030 that are really all about what Catholic Relief Services and Catholic Charities and Laudato Si and so much of what both the domestic church in the United States are pushing for, as well as Pope Francis. So basically, I was just, involved early on in the initiative in North America, and then we decided to formalize the structure. So we have an actual chapter. And so I work with people from around the world, different chapter chairs, to basically do our best to encourage business schools to integrate these principles and these commitments to poverty alleviation and sustainability and gender equality, focus on, mothers and children and economic development and just all these things, again, to sort of, it's always the dialectic for me between between human dignity and the common good. And so the ways in which we're both increasing humanization, but then also, increasing the communities that people live in because they go hand in hand. So, just because of the work that I was doing, I became chair about a year and a half ago, and I'm just working now to set up infrastructure. So it's not like a super glorious, there's no pay, there's no course release, there's no glory, but what I really like about it is, almost everything is completely in line with Catholic institutions. And so it's easy for me to talk to colleagues at other Catholic institutions about this. And then, we try to provide support to other institutions who may be more reluctant either to work with the United Nations or might be more reluctant to speak, the language of values, which is, just obviously not a problem at a Catholic university.
That's super cool. I have impressive friends. Okay, so now we sort of transition to our prayer segment of our podcast. So we ask all our guests about their prayer life. I know that is one thing we do know about. I do know about Liz's prayer life. So I'm just going to ask you, talk about your prayer life. How do you pray each day? What keeps you praying?
So when I was thinking about this, one thing that I talk to my students a lot about in my classes is, that one thing that I think is really important about the way Catholicism understands the life of faith is that it's a journey motif, right? So it's not, a one-time decision, and it really is that you're on this journey of lots of ups and downs, from the beginning of your life until the end of your life. And so I was thinking back over, all the various ways in which I've prayed over the years, which I think a lot of them reflect maybe the age that I was at the time. And so I think my prayer life now is very different than it has been at other times. Obviously, in terms of COVID, going to Mass is not an option. I live stream Mass from Old St. Patrick's Church in downtown Chicago, which has an amazing ministry. I used to work there, and I got married there. And then also I belong to a very different kind of parish that's an immigrant parish. It's very social justice oriented, and they live stream just the Liturgy of the Word on Sundays. So I'd say right now, because the liturgy is not an option where I live, they aren't really having in-person liturgies. A lot of is what can I do at home? And what I think at the age I'm at now, I have 3 Jesuit degrees. So Ignatian spirituality just runs through my veins, and finding God in all things is, a Jesuit, one of the many sayings that the Jesuits have. That and cura personalis, where you are caring for the whole person. And so I'm at a point now where, day to day things are different in terms of teaching and meetings and what my kids are up to. And we don't really have a consistent schedule in the way that we would during a normal school year, where we'd all be getting up at the same time. Different kids are going in on different days or not going in. So my prayer life now, it kind of depends on the day, but I have maybe 5 practices that I draw on throughout the day to the extent possible. So the one consistent thing that I've used for prayer is the Jesuit prayer app. And so that is something that when I wake up in the morning, I might glance at it quickly. There's always an email or there's an app, and there's a short, excerpt from the scripture of the day, and then a reflection by someone who has some sort of Ignatian training or works at a Jesuit institution, and then a prayer. So on the days that I'm most rushed, that is how I start my day. And that is something that I've been doing for many years. Sharon, you and I and another friend of ours contributed to those reflections at one time. So it's really wonderful because you get, parents, single people, priests, nuns, people working in universities, high schools, retreat ministry. You get so many people writing reflections. So I think if I don't have a lot of time, that's good. That's a good way to start the day. On my very best days, I use the Liturgy of the Hours, which the Carmelites of Indianapolis have a 2-volume set called The People's Companion to the Breviary. And while I don't actually know if I do it properly, in terms of like whatever the rules are, I've never had anybody train me in the Liturgy of the Hours. But what I love about it is that there's morning, afternoon, and evening prayer. And one thing that I have found from having having several Muslim colleagues at work, and I actually currently live in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, is the way in which they punctuate their day keeps prayer always as a reminder. So I have students from Saudi Arabia, and I have several colleagues at the business school, and there's a prayer room where they go and they can pray 5 times a day. And so I have found that in terms of like what feeds my soul is more the constant reminder. And those are the days where, I probably feel closest to God. I feel like I'm being the best version of myself in terms of who I'm called to be, depending on what I'm doing. And then the other 2 pieces that are also really feeding me is I've been doing yoga for about 1.5 years. And I've also been using a meditation app called 10% Happier. And what I find about those is sort of this, the cura personalis, caring for the whole person, understanding that, physiologically breathing, being calm and reflective with yoga. And then a lot of meditation practice that I really like is, what I've learned that has fed my prayer is that in meditation, there's no expectation that you're going to be perfect, right? That you're going to sit there perfectly still. And so one of the phrases that this guy uses who leads a lot of the meditations that I listen to is simply begin again. And so what I love about that is that he'll punctuate, the meditations with simply begin again if I've gotten distracted. But that relates to the Liturgy of the Hours, because if I'm praying the psalm and I don't really know what that psalm is about, and my mind wanders, or there's a reading for the day of maybe a theologian I've never heard of, and I'm really preoccupied with something, as opposed to sort of judging the failure of my prayer, I can just sort of note, simply begin again. So I'm just finding right now that sort of the intersection of yoga and meditation and my more Catholic grounded prayers really feed each other in a way that right now, especially being stuck at home with COVID all the time, is providing me a well during this time.
Speaking of being stuck home with COVID, and you mentioned something that made me remember that we normally ask people that sometimes it is difficult to pray. So has there been a time in your life, that you've found it hard to pray?
Yes, many, many times throughout my entire life. And I think that there are, a wide variety of different reasons. It could be that I've moved a lot. I moved a lot. And so usually I found the first year wherever I moved to be pretty difficult. But I would say prayer. So before I had kids, daily mass would have been really what grounded me. But then when I had kids, I just wasn't really able to go to daily mass anymore. And so I think that, that's why maybe I've shifted more to the Liturgy of the Hours now. So sometimes that rote prayer or the ritual that maybe doesn't feed me holistically in the same way, but it's part of who I am and it's part of something I've always done, and it feeds a different piece. I'd say usually Mass is consistent, which is why this is such an interesting time. So I turned 50 this summer, and normally I would have gone to the 12:10 Mass at Old St. Pat's, and my husband and I always meet at the parish where we got married on Ash Wednesday to go to Mass. So all of those rituals have really been turned upside down. So I'd say, though, yes, when I've had difficult times, I go back to daily Mass and the Liturgy of the Hours. And then the piece we haven't talked about is, in addition to these, Mass and the Jesuit prayer and the Liturgy of the Hours, I have a great community of people for whom faith is really important to them. And while a lot of them aren't Catholic, I do have Sharon and our friend Judy, and we try to Skype, every week or two just to check in, sort of as, a community of faith-filled support for each other. So it's everything from, talking about marriage and parenting as, women of faith to, having a kid going through a hard day and just texting and asking for prayers. And so I think also throughout my life at the most difficult times, the community of support that I've had in terms of friends has been really central to keeping me going.
Awesome. That's great. And you're right. I mean, as we go through life, our prayer changes, right? And often those transitions can be a difficult time to pray, but then to kind of find okay, what is going to feed me at this moment in my life? That's a big thing to do. And then kind of last thing we ask everyone is kind of a universal prayer intention. So if you could, tell the whole world one thing to pray for, what would that be and why?
So I think what I would want people to pray for, and I talk about this a lot in my classes, is for people to pray for the gift of deep listening and deep empathy when they're listening. As a college professor, I meet with most of my students one-on-one, and it's really unbelievable what people are going through, that you would never have any idea. So many people are dealing with so much. And I think we, live in a society right now where, listening is not something that we focus on. It's not taught. There's a lot of talking, but especially just, in the last 6 weeks, I've spent hours meeting with students one-on-one. And I can't tell you how amazing the emails are that I get from them, where even students will say, I haven't had a conversation where someone just sat and listened for a really long time. And so I just think it's part of, that's how our dignity grows, if somebody knows you. So that would be my prayer.
Excellent. So, dear God, help us to listen better. Well, this has been a great conversation. We're so appreciative that you took time out to chat with us. And we ask all our guests to lead us in the Glory Be to wrap up our podcast. So will you please lead us?
Yes. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. Amen.
Amen.
Glory Be is a production of the Office of Communications at the Church of St. Mary in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm your producer, Mike Malcolm. See you next time.